Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of those that are watching, whether it's on YouTube or live on Instagram. It is a pleasure to be here once again as part of Orchestra Vitae's efforts to bring the music that we're doing and that we still have been doing a little bit closer to all of you at your houses. As some of you might know, tonight would have been the first concert of Orchestra Vitae's season, a concert at the wonderful St. John Smith Square at 7:30 that would have been preceded by a concert talk. So we thought that despite the obvious unfortunate events and having to postpone this concert, we wanted to have the opportunity to have this pre-concert talk for all of you and give you a little bit of background on the pieces that we were doing or why it is that we decided this program, and also to show you ideally would have been our own way of interpreting this music, but because we obviously can't do that, we thought to give you at least the opportunity to listen to the pieces that we have chosen from the selection of Spotify as our desired wish list for all of you to enjoy. So, in case that you don't know, my name is Pablo Urbina and I'm the Principal Conductor of Orchestra Vitae of London, as well as the Assistant Conductor of the Balearic Symphony Orchestra. I've been with the orchestra since last June, and I will have been conducting this wonderful concert that will have had, amongst other pieces, Beethoven's Symphony No. 7, Mozart's Divertimento in D major, K316, 116, sorry, and one of the premieres of Hilary Tann's Water Edges in the UK. So, extremely exciting program alongside a wonderful colleague and friend of mine as a guest conductor, having Philip Keller. So, obviously, we cannot do this, and this is why we present to you this program. This was a very exciting program for all of us because we were really looking forward to start a new phase of the orchestra, a phase of growth, a phase of development, and as such, we wanted to choose a program that not only looked into the past history of the orchestra and the different things that the orchestra did, but also moving it forward into the future. So starting from looking at the classics of many wonderful composers, some of which Orchestra Vitae had already performed, like for example the Mozart Divertimento in D, and then taking it to the next level by studying some of the great classics, like it could be Mozart or Beethoven, and moving it into the 21st century with a piece like Water's Edge by Hilary Tann. And why was this important for us? Because at Orchestra Vitae, one of our main goals is, of course, to support new music and the great composers that are creating music these days. We were really looking forward to have Hilary Tann as our guest for this evening. Also, we'll have been co-hosting this pre-concert talk with me, had it been done live for all of you at St. John Smith Square. But don't you worry, because at some point or another, we will have this concert. Right now, it's been scheduled once again from what we thought would be at the beginning of the summer in June to now most likely will be taking place in the autumn of 2020. So we are not forgetting about this wonderful program, but we're just moving it into a bit later on. Also important to say this because we wanted to hopefully be able to pay a little bit of tribute to Beethoven on his 250-year anniversary, which is in 2020, and we really hope that we can still do this concert. So for me, also one of the main reasons why I chose, and I think it's important to mention or to at least bring it to your attention, this program, it had a little bit of a tie over for me personally as a conductor from my experience for many years as the music director of London City Orchestra, and now taking over Orchestra Vitae as principal conductor. And a really interesting way that this happened to be was through actual Hilary Tan's piece, Water's Edge. My last concert with Orchestra Vitae was indeed a concert themed around the concept of water, in which we did Vaughan Williams' Symphony, Sibelius' Oceanides Overture, amongst other pieces, and the Flying Dutchman Overture. And this concert will have had Hilary Tan's Water's Edge. So for me, very important that there was a little bit of a connection moving on from one arena into the other. So a very special concert with Orchestra Vitae that we will have done. Also, and I will get to this a little bit later on, the pre-concert talk that I'm having for all of you here to enjoy today would have been the opportunity to introduce our Concert Champs initiative, which is one of the projects that we are most proud and excited at Orchestra Vitae to have going on in support of people fighting loneliness and making our little humble contribution to help them. Obviously, through these difficult times, it is even more reassuring and more necessary to help them in difficult times like this. So we will be introducing the initiatives that we can, in the best possible way, do for all of them. If we start talking about the concert that will have taken place tonight, or that hopefully in your home will take place, we will have had a wonderful exposure of 40 years of music. You know, you think about Mozart's Divertimento in D, composed in 1772, and then Beethoven's Seventh Symphony being premiered on 1813. That is around no more than 41 years of music history. That actually so many things happen around the same, you know, so much evolution went on in classical music as well as in history. You know, we're talking about a time in which the Americans were fighting the revolution. They were trying to move away from the British Empire, so to speak, a time in which Australia had just been discovered a couple of years before. So the world was beginning to expand even farther, and India not that much farther before. The French Revolution is just around the corner, you know, in 1789, and we're just around this extremely tumultuous and crucial time of history, at the same time, the very, very different time for music. And funny to see how in classical music, it all actually works more or less in similar ways, but so different at the same time. So this is what we have composers like Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, which now have gone on to history to become such the great masters. We will have begun our concert with Mozart Divertimento, K116 in D major. Now, this is a beautiful piece of work, really exciting and fast-driven, and often played by string quartets and not by string orchestras, even though it was written for a string orchestra. And one of the reasons why this happens is because it is so virtuosistic, particularly in the way that it uses the first violin. So I wanted to bring you a quick example of how this will sound if it was performed indeed by a string quartet and not by a string orchestra, like you will eventually hear Orchestra Vitae perform like. As we can tell, a very, very, very different way of sounding that if it was a string orchestra, which I will play towards the end. The term divertimento was actually not done by Mozart himself, but arguably, according to scholars, by his father Leopold Mozart. As we know, he was the big mentor of Mozart for most of his career, and really, my iPad just fell all the way to the ground. Thank God that it has a cover. You know, if we think of Leopold Mozart in today's society, almost we could certainly think that he would have been sued at some point for sort of exploiting his child. We're talking about a prodigy of a, hello Mariano, a prodigy of a child that was working from such a young age, really. But indeed, we have to in a way thank him for the wonderful contribution that he's done to music history. What is a divertimento? You know, for English speakers, not a common word in the language. For Spanish speakers, Portuguese, Italians, divertimento already comes to our head very quickly as something that we enjoy. So it makes sense for us something that is uplifting. Sorry, sometimes I lose my thought because I keep seeing this Instagram live, you know, with the comments here. Hello, Alberto. Hello, Diego. Hello, everyone. Jad. So many people. Miguel. Hello. So the divertimento, indeed, it follows very nicely from the old suite form. For those of you that are not musicians, and you don't have to be, a suite was basically a way of organizing musical pieces, often sometimes for keyboard or solo instruments. If we think of the Bach cello suites, that's perhaps the suite that we know most. And the divertimento sort of fits in this arena in between the suite and other forms of arranging smaller pieces of music into a combined form. Very much used by Haydn and Mozart, and this is why I think perhaps for promotional reasons, or and we don't know scholarly, we don't know for sure, but either to organize it better for publication or because it made sense, it was the way of organizing back then, that Leopold Mozart decided to give the term divertimento to a series of works of Mozart. This one is very noticeably influenced by Mozart's trips. And the fact is that Mozart traveled a lot. He was a very popular guy in Europe, in court Europe, and he wanted to be a guest of honor of all the big houses that promoted music at the time, whether it was privately or not. So he actually took a lot of trips from a young age. And we have to think that Mozart was quite young when he conducted this work, when he created this piece of work. At the time, he had just come back from a trip from Italy. So the way that this piece is distributed is very much on the way of the Italian Sinfonia. And I don't want to get very technical here, but Sinfonia was the fancy way of overtures, of calling an overture back on the day. And as a matter of fact, if we look at some of the operas, you know, the pieces of music for people like us that perform opera, we might have noticed that in some of them, like for example, I'm thinking of the Nabucco overture by Verdi. Actually, in a lot of the pages, and musician friends that are watching here or at some other stage through our YouTube channel might recall, actually, Nabucco, sometimes it says on the title, Nabucco Sinfonia. And a lot of people get very confused by this term, and they think, well, but what is a sinfonia? It's an overture. The reason why is because traditionally, overtures were called sinfonias. And this is not actually a coincidence to the fact that, hello Stefano, this is not a coincidence to the fact that later on our symphonies, our modern symphonies, have actually been called that way, symphonies. And why that is because they all derive from the old sinfonias or overtures. The Italian sinfonias and the French symphonias as well, or French overture, were created as a prelude to the main piece of music, whether that was an opera or any other thing. And they were normally structured first in the French way, in two parts, a slow and a fast. And then later on, Italians did it in a fast, slow, fast. Now, if to that model of fast, slow, fast, we then add a dance, which, for example, let's say a waltz, then we have, as you might have figured by now, our standard symphonic arrangement of a first movement, which is fast, then the slow, more nostalgic, romantic movement. In the middle, we have a minuet, a waltz, trio minuet, scherzo minuet, however, all the different forms that it has taken throughout the years. And of course, at the very end, a fast movement. And this divertimento by Mozart, not to go super long on it, follows a bit of this example. A fast first movement, a slow second movement, and a fast third movement, like all these Italian sinfonias. And hence why the Italian Sinfonia inspires this work. And it makes sense because, like I said, Mozart had just been in Italy not long before he came and composed this movement. This piece, as I said earlier, is extremely virtuosistic, and I have chosen for it for our Spotify wish list for you to listen after this conversation, and I will post, don't you worry, the list on the chat of YouTube and on a link in on Instagram as soon as we finish the pre-concert talk. The virtuosism makes that some people really take it quite fast at times. I've picked an example because I didn't want to show you what you're about to listen later on. I picked an example to show how much some ensembles can actually take this piece of music. In my humble opinion as a conductor, a bit too fast, but nonetheless very exciting, and it really showcases the virtuosism. I hope you enjoy. You get the idea. Now, very quickly, if I show you back then, now that we have this fresh in our minds, how it sounded when he had just the string quartet, quite a difference. As we can tell, extreme different color of sound. Which one is better? That is up to you to decide. I will never try to tamper with your opinion. So this brings us to a very nice, interesting next conversation, and it is the relationship of Mozart and Haydn. You know, for all of us, myself included, when we started studying music in conservatoire, I always thought of Haydn as a person that went before Mozart. So in our sequence of events, we always think Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, when actually all of them overlapped in time at some point or another. And this is it's extremely fascinating from a point of understanding how they influence each other as composers. Not only that, if we think about, oh wow, hello Sean, great. Yes, it's a very fast version. If you can manage the orchestra to conduct it that fast, then you might be quite shining in your competition. Best of luck with it. As I was saying, you know, actually at the time that Mozart died, Haydn was still alive. Haydn lived quite an old age for that time, and he was quite upset by the whole situation. So it brings it into perspective, especially because Mozart always openly admitted that a lot of his inspiration for a lot of his string quartets and his string writing came from his admiration to Haydn. We know that at the time that Mozart composed this divertimento, he hadn't met yet Haydn, but indeed Haydn was a very established composer back then and quite highly regarded as a composer. So we know that they will have at this time Mozart had a great admiration for Haydn, and then Haydn had a great admiration for Mozart. And I'm going to read a little quote about Haydn's opinion of Mozart once that they met in a letter that was published first in 1798, and it reads, "Scarcely any man can brook comparison with the great Mozart. If I could only impress on the soul of every friend of music, and on high personages in particular, how inimitable are Mozart's works, how profound, how musically intelligent, how extraordinarily sensitive." As you can see, quite a deep admiration of Haydn to Mozart. And we know that this was also the other way around, because even though Mozart never spoke, mentioned in any of his letters about Haydn, about their encounter, on a biography that was done shortly after Mozart's death, his wife, whom some of you might know, was named Constanza, spoke about the relationship between Haydn and Mozart. But here's the thing that I found that I find extremely interesting. And it really shows us, hello Javier, it really shows a lot of how life changes, from a generation to another, and how nowadays only the great people or the great composers might have survived. When Constanza speaks, hello Eleonora, when Constanza speaks about Haydn, she actually refers to the Haydns. And why that is, you might be asking, is because not only was Joseph Haydn, the one that we know nowadays, the famous Haydn, was a musician, but also he had a younger brother who was also a musician, and his name was Johann Michael Haydn. So Michael Haydn and Joseph Haydn, two different people that lived around the same time. And as a matter of fact, Michael Haydn was much better friend with Mozart than Joseph Haydn himself. And we take even this step further, and not to get too gossipy, but I think you might find this interesting. There is some scholar sources, some professional sources that have done heavy research on the relationship between Michael Haydn and Mozart that suggest that actually the Mozart Requiem that nowadays we envision as one of the greatest, hello Fermin, one of the greatest pieces of classical music ever written and never finished, because if you know, the Mozart Requiem was never finished. Actually, this might have been inspired heavily by Michael, not Joseph, not the Haydn that we know, but the other, Michael Haydn's Requiem, which was done for the Archbishop of Salzburg in 1771, the year before this divertimento was composed. I don't know about you, but for me, when I first learned this piece of information, my world was turned upside down. Although we know that Mozart indeed respected Haydn so much, to know that so much of the relationship of Michael Haydn and Mozart might have influenced Mozart's work was also extremely curious. And I'll give you another piece of information that you might find interesting. If you look at the catalogue of Mozart, out of his 41 symphonies, there is actually one which is non-number, and that's number 37. And the reason why that is none other than because for many years people thought that Mozart Symphony number 37 was actually was a symphony written by him, although we've now come to know that that symphony belonged all along to Michael Haydn, and it was just because of their great friendship and admiration that Mozart wrote a slow introduction to this symphony, which was later found in his manuscripts, and then why everyone got it confused. I don't know about you, but maybe I'm just way too excited about classical music, but I find this extremely fascinating from an investigation point of view, from a research point of view of classical music. The next piece on the program that we have had was Haydn's Symphony number 90. Now, the symphony was done as a commission by the Count of Ogny, a French count, in 1788, and it was oh, ciao Valentina, and it was composed again as a series of three pieces. Now, just taking an understanding that some of you had just joined in on Instagram, this is well, you know who I am because you see it, but this is a pre-concert talk organized by Orchestra Vitae in what would have been our first concert of the season tonight at St. John Smith Square, which sadly had to be postponed, but we thought, why not to carry on with a small introduction. Now, that doesn't mean that we will of course have an introduction for everyone, any of you that will make it back on hopefully the autumn 2020, but at least now we give you a little preview of some of the pieces that we will have been performing. So as I was saying, Haydn 90, a commission by the Count of Ogny as part of 3 symphonies. And this for me is extremely important because it shows a tendency in the history of classical music and how how relevant nowadays when the music industry is suffering or is going to suffer a change, because the economy is going to have a different turn, hopefully nothing bad, but we will really have to cannot emphasize enough how important it is for us for musicians and for classical music to have the support of patrons and friends that are there to continue to support the creative endeavors of our profession. So thank you so much to all of you that support it. I hope that you continue to do so. And we thank you for allowing us to do what we love to do and what we do best. Yeah, it's the really most fascinating thing about this symphony and why it has become so famous is the end of the fourth movement. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you too much in case that you are not familiar with this piece of work, but something happens at the end of the fourth movement that throws people a bit off balance. And the reason why this is also very important, not just from the humor point of view, and as you might know, or at least when I think of Haydn, I always think of three words, I suppose, that come to my mind and they influence everything that I do with that music. One is, of course, elegance. I think of Haydn, I think of an elegant person, about classy way of interpreting music. I could never conduct or perform Haydn in a dirty, unclean way. I also think of Haydn as structure and form, and that helps a lot with the way that the symphonies are structured and we perform a symphony. And I also think of Haydn, and I think undoubtedly of humor. And I think that this Symphony number 90 is perhaps one of his most known hints of humor. Again, I won't reveal too much because of this. From a musician's point of view, from a conductor point of view, and remember, a lot of the things that we conductors do is try to understand the overall structure and also understand the harmony and why a composer has composed the music in which one way or the other. And this symphony finishes, at some point it finishes on C major, which is the most basic key or way that you can think. And then suddenly it jumps into D flat major. I don't want to get too much into detail, but nowadays this would be not a problem. If I could play it on you on the piano, nobody will think anything of this transition from C major to D flat major, which is on the opposite spectrum of the key signatures. We're talking from no flats or sharps to 5 flats, very, very distant apart. It's just like completely different worlds. For those of you that are not musicians, think of it suddenly like teletransportation, musical transportation from being in China, and then 5 minutes later you're suddenly in the United States, and you don't know how you went from one place to the other. All of a sudden. This would have never happened in Haydn's time, suddenly, like that, unless that you do what he did. And hence why it's doubly interesting for me. And I just want to play a little bit of the excerpt, if I might find it for you here, that shows this end and what might happen after. So again, without reading too much, I'll show you a bit of the end and C major that I was talking about from around here. I don't want to ruin it, but I suggest that you pay a bit of attention when we post our Spotify playlist, which actually has this very same excerpt, but it's slightly different, and this is why it has 2 versions, although I've only put 1 in that playlist. I hope that you figure out what happens in this symphony, and please, you can put it on the comments on Orchestra Vitae's Instagram page or on this video on YouTube. However, it is, the domain is very simple. It's at Orchestra Vitae on Instagram and Twitter and all the other platforms. Very easy to follow the orchestra there. Mozart and Beethoven. Now, there is no doubt, and we know that they had very, very little contact, but we know that Mozart had indeed a very great influence in Beethoven. They briefly may have met. We don't know this for sure. We think that it might have happened. There is no corroboration or formal sources. I'm going to drink a bit of sip of water, you don't mind? But what it is undoubtedly evident is that Mozart had a great influence in Beethoven, and this carried all the way throughout. And I think that if it had been for Beethoven, he would have definitely wanted to study full time. Beethoven did, on the other hand, studied with Joseph Haydn for a large portion of his time. They first met in 1792 when Beethoven showed a couple of his works to Haydn, and Haydn obviously saw a lot of the potential and talent of Beethoven and took him under his wing to be as a pupil. As a matter of fact, for a long part of his time, he will call him Papa Haydn. This was the term that was the word a charming, a cute way of calling his pupil. If you read a little bit about, again, not to get too boring, but if you read a little bit about Beethoven's opinion of Haydn later on, a lot of people realize that actually by the end, Beethoven wasn't too fond of Haydn. And as a matter of fact, he gets awfully misquoted, I would say, as saying that he never learned anything from Haydn, almost as in to say that Beethoven didn't really take Haydn very seriously. And I think this is not fair, and it's not entirely true. What seems to have happened, according to the sources and the letters and the research that we have from around that time, is that at some point Beethoven asked for feedback on some of his piano trios to Haydn. And actually Haydn said that the last one of the piano trios, Opus 1, needed a lot of more work before they were ready to be published. Now you have to think Beethoven was a guy with a lot of principles, and very assured of his potential, and didn't take this very well. So much so that he did two things later on. Well, firstly, as we know, this might have sparked his rejection of Haydn as his teacher. But also, he never ever acknowledged publicly in his music that he was a pupil of Haydn, and this is something that Haydn never really forgave him for. He never gave the credit to Haydn that Haydn actually deserved as one of his mentors and teachers. So all Haydn would have ever wanted was to say, Symphony Number 5 by Beethoven, brackets, a pupil of Haydn, and this actually never ever happened. This is not the first, and it makes a lot of sense to me when I look at Beethoven's music and when I understand a bit about his background as he was as a person. It doesn't surprise me, because actually the symphony, the Symphony Number 3 that Beethoven composed, what we now know as Eroica Symphony, and which is one of the most influential pieces of music of the symphonic repertoire ever, and really a big change and a leap forward into the Romantic period from the classical, was going to be originally dedicated to Napoleon. And we know that Beethoven was a fan of Napoleon for a big part of his upbringing, really convinced about the ideals of the liberty and equality and freedom that Napoleon really was going forth, especially when he was the first consul in the sort of new Republic of France after the Revolution. The moment that Napoleon turns into an emperor, this makes Beethoven really angry, because Beethoven feels that, here is again. It's a bit this whole idea of, we're going against the system until I am in the system, and then the system becomes me, and I say so, and we do it. And Beethoven was so unhappy with this that he changed and scraped the dedication to his third symphony and gave it to someone else, in this case. So it makes perfect sense that he would have taken this approach, so harsh from Haydn's criticism, and then take it so much forward throughout his career. It really shows a lot of that risk and a strong character of Beethoven. Beethoven will have ended our concert with Beethoven's Symphony Number 7, which again was composed in 1812 and premiered in 1813. And it was done in a benefit concert against the troops that were, again, wounded in Hanau, but fighting in all these wars that were going around the same time. For me, I was really much looking forward to this piece. It's a piece that I've played as a French horn player. I have studied in depth. I have attended rehearsals. I was very lucky to see the rehearsals of this piece with Bon Dognani and the Philharmonia Orchestra about 4 or 5 years ago. Thanks to the invitation of the Royal College of Music to the conducting students, we were able to go and have a wonderful opportunity to see it live. Even more recently, when in February I was assisting the wonderful American conductor Leonard Slatkin here in Mallorca, where he conducted the Tchaikovsky's Symphony Number 5. I had a chance to tell him, that I was going to be conducting this piece today, and because I had the scores here, because I was ready to study on my free time, he very kindly took time out of his busy schedule to go through the whole score with me, telling him his tricks, the things that he's learned through years and years of conducting this piece. And what a pleasure that was for me to be able to learn from such a wonderful conductor. So, hello, Eva. And again, I was so much looking forward to it. Also, I admire so much one of the greatest conductors, Carlos Kleiber, who I find his Beethoven just absolutely out of this world, so to speak. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this, and I won't stick too much longer because I understand we've been more than 30 minutes going, is it's an observation, In the second movement of this symphony, Beethoven marks allegretto as the way of performing it. So, hello, Alberto. So he obviously gives us the impression that he wants it to take it quite fast, but we know actually that he did not want it at all to be taken so fast. If anything, almost like an andante, quasi allegretto. So with a bit of flow, but not too fast. And this always makes me think, that it brings it back to the question of how much do we have to understand or try to take into consideration the markings of the composers, especially of those times, and their ideas of how they want the music to be done. There's, we know very well how Stravinsky wasn't perhaps the best person to judge his own tempos when it came to his own music. And nowadays, if we look at some of the recordings of himself conducting, let's say, Firebird or Petrushka, they're actually very different to what the score actually says, the markings that he himself put into it. So this is always a question about, can we fully trust these ideas, or do we have to look into also what the music is doing, what the intention of the music is doing, and many other things that will help us to dictate the best speed or the best mood or the best way to approach and tackle the work. Just putting the question out there for all of you. You can have your opinion. I'd love to hear what you have to say or what you think about it. I wanted to leave for the last Hilary Tan's Water's Edge, because it's a piece that you might not have heard before. Wonderful piece by a Welsh composer, actually, although she's based on the United States. Studied first at the University of Wales, then went to Princeton University. Not sure if this is what sparked the idea to stay there. I was hoping to ask this myself and to get a chance to meet her in person. Hopefully this will happen sooner than later. I'm really looking forward to that moment. The piece of Water Edge was initially conceived for piano duet, and it talks about the way of sort of the interaction between light and water in its surface area. So in other words, how the light reflects on the surface part of the water, on a river and a dam, and how it changes depending on the place. So, losing with Wi-Fi there. I hope that it comes back soon. Wi-Fi hasn't been the greatest, as you can see, especially as we approach the clapping time in Spain. I'm really sorry. I hope it comes back soon. So as I was saying, originally conceived from piano, and like that, many works. We could think of Ravel, Debussy arranging his own pieces of piano, so wonderfully composed into orchestral pieces. And I wanted to show you very quickly the beginning of his piano duet version of this piece, and how she then transformed it so wonderfully and magically into a strings piece, orchestra piece for string orchestra. Now listen to the very same beginning, but this time for a string orchestra. Wonderfully done. Really, really a wonderful way to do it. So I wanted to finish today with one of the things that we are most passionate about. And firstly, again, thank you for all of you that have tuned in on YouTube or Instagram at some point or another. We will not keep, I think, this streaming live on YouTube for the simple reason that we really want you to attend our concert, and we really want you to be there at that pre-concert talk again. So you know that you can always, ask any questions about the music, any questions about anything. Some of you might have seen the Q&A that I did on Sunday for Orchestra Vitae, with Orchestra Vitae, talking about anything to do with conducting, answering all your questions from why the baton or what it is made of, to more minimal pieces, more meaningful or deep questions about actual, music and my profession itself. Anything is always welcome. We really want to be engaged with our friends and supporters, with all of you. So please, anything that we can do, you know how to reach us, whether it's my personal social media or email or Orchestra Vitae's email. We're there for you through these times, and we want you to be a part of what we do. And we were very, very extremely excited to, I sound like Trump right now. I'm very, 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 very excited. Extremely excited to launch the Concert Champs initiative. And this Concert Champs initiative is designed to help those that are fighting or struggling with loneliness. We didn't know this pandemic was going to happen. It actually has even brought it up even more than we could have imagined. This idea, these issues that some people struggle with when they're isolated at their home, not really able to go outside. We thought in the day, how many people would love to come to a concert but are unable or just don't feel the energy to go by themselves. And we wanted to make ourselves available to assist in any way for them to feel comfortable, so that this could be easier. And hence why this idea of the Concert Champs initiative appeared and was born out of this desire of the orchestra. We are introducing now a Concert Champs talks and chats, in which we're giving the opportunity to anyone. And this is important because you might have someone at your home or that might be able to benefit from this. We know that some of our elder friends, families are not in the same position as us to be so connected with social media, and they might struggle to actually be staying up to, staying motivated and happy. And let's be honest, tuning into the media these days and to the news is not the most exciting thing. So the Concert Champs chats and talks is born with the desire to help us, to help them through music. Bringing some of our musicians from the orchestra to them, whether it's by telephone, by Skype, whatever it is that they can do, they can within their means do. And if it's by playing music to them on the phone or having a nice conversation about music, so be it. We're not just offering any spare time. We want music to be at the center of this. So if they have any particular piece that we can be of help or to assist them, the option is there. And it's very simple. All you have to do is email the orchestra. You have the details on our website on orchestravitae.co.uk, or getting in contact through social media I'm sure that you can think of someone that might benefit, and if not, please do try. We want to spread the word, help us to do this job, to help those that need it most. With this in mind, I leave you with this thought, and I thank you once again for taking part in this pre-concert talk. I will post shortly on my Instagram bio the link to the Spotify playlist that I hope that all of you can enjoy. I will post this also on this video on YouTube before I stop the broadcast. Those of you that are watching can actually do it. Once again, I thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you have a lovely evening. I hope that you stay healthy and safe with your families, and if you have any questions about anything, music preferably, we're here for you. Take care. Have a lovely evening.